Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Echoes, Lucifer and the Dark Goddess, Book 1 by Nikki Broadwell, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue. A splash of water, ever-widening circles as leaves stirred in the gentle breeze to land delicately, bright spots of color on an otherwise dark expanse. A pale shift clung, wet now, my long hair secured with a stick. I bent to cup the water into my hands, splashing my face before moving deeper until I could no longer touch the bottom. And there I floated, eyes closed, suspended as though held by invisible hands. The woodland behind the pond was singing with summer sounds, the chatter of birds, the chirp of frogs and crickets, the snuffle of skunks and other small creatures rooting on the forest floor. Turquoise dragonflies flitted across still water, iridescent wings catching the light. Symbolizing change, self-realization, and the deeper meaning of life, the whir of their wings was another source of solace, my eyes opening for a moment to watch them. The day lengthened and stretched, the sun hovering in a cerulean sky. No clouds marred the slow trajectory, shadows growing longer as the life-giving orb moved slowly toward the west. I roused, wondering how long I'd been here. The water rippled as I shifted. The forest felt my contented sigh and the animals perking up to listen. But it was time to go. Sadness filled my heart as I rose from the water and looked around at my home. Voices in the distance, the small garden and the house that lay just beyond the trees. I'd said my goodbyes, clinging to those I loved. This was my cleansing ritual in preparation for what was to come. I squeezed water from the tunic, smoothing out the wrinkles. The light fabric would be dry by the time I reached my destination. I turned to see her, dark eyes finding mine where I stood quiet on the edge of here and there. Take care, my daughter. Do not fall prey to what lurks in the shadows. The words echoed as I stepped through. Chapter 1, 2320. Shadows moved across my vision, taking the pale crescent moon, dark water, and feeling of safety along with it. I gasped and opened my eyes. 2 walls so tall I couldn't see the top. Dirt under me, rats scurrying, beady eyes meeting mine. When I rose to my knees, the beautiful visions ticked away, one by one, replaced with the miasma of rot, garbage, and unwashed bodies. Hey, you okay? A man hovered over me, his mahogany skin gleaming. Soft brown eyes surrounded with wild hair met mine. I don't know, I answered, taking the hand he held out. He grinned, revealing straight teeth that gleamed white as he pulled me up. What's your name? I stared at him, trying to recall my name or anything else about me. For a second, my mind was blank, and then it came to me. Theron, I said as though remembering a question on a test. It's Gaelic. Gaelic? That's not a language I've ever heard. Where are you from? We emerged from the alley. Fires lit up the dark street, hunched people sitting around them. And lurking in the dark like hulking beasts were enormous structures, malevolent creatures poised to pounce. I could feel them leaning in to see who this newcomer might be. Where am I? Have you heard of hell? This is basically it. I'm Jeremy, by the way. Welcome to my world, Farron. Fee, I muttered, meeting the gazes of the others as they took in my appearance. I go by Fee. Jeremy laughed. Either a fairy or a debt to be paid. Which is it? I don't know, I muttered, glancing down at the rough tunic I wore, my bare feet covered in dirt. I'd say fairy, since you have an otherworldly aspect, especially with that crescent moon tattoo on your forehead. Come meet Isabel, my sister. What tattoo? I asked, my fingers moving to my forehead. Jeremy turned. The one right there, he answered, placing his forefinger on a spot near my hairline. A moon like that symbolizes feminine power. When he turned again, I followed him toward a dark-skinned girl with big eyes who sat next to one of the fires. She had metal hoops in her ears and a wide band around her head to hold her braids back, not one but many. I heard the words, "Who is she?" and felt the fear coming from the young woman. But Jeremy was already next to her, whispering in her ear, "Nothing to be afraid of, little sister." Jeremy's people took me in, sharing their food and blankets and their wisdom. I was with them for 6 months before I moved on. They were exotic and beautiful, with earrings made out of twisted scrap metal, piercings in their noses and lips, and wide woven metal bands around their upper arms and wrists. Strips of bright material had been woven into their dark hair. Their clothing consisted of pieces they'd sewn together into strange asymmetrical skirts that hung on their hips, bellies exposed, and piercings in their navels. The men wore loose-fitting pants in the same materials. When it grew cold, they added jackets and shawls made from blankets. They used items from the dumpsters, turning them into things of beauty as well as tools. But to them, I was the exotic one, the indigo moon tattoo, my sudden arrival and lack of memories confirming it. When I asked, Isabel told me about the old beliefs, the spiritual ways they'd held onto as a group. They used dance as a way to connect with something greater, and they laughed a lot. Many played instruments they'd put together with wood and strings made from wires. We looked to each other and the wise ones for our strength, she confided. Wise ones? The ones who can see. The drumming puts them in trance and they get visions. Somehow this seemed oddly familiar, although why I wasn't clear. I only knew that something lurked in the back of my mind, something bigger that was similar to what she spoke of. I learned a lot from them, as well as the other ethnic groups who came and went. They were all slightly different in appearance and customs, but they managed to get along. Maybe it was the struggle to survive that simplified their lives. And because I knew nothing about them or myself, I soaked in everything they had to say. Eventually, I had to move on, if only to discover my own identity. But leaving the stable bubble of their friendship posed another set of problems as I lost myself in a city so vast and heartless that I could barely manage. Gift. My name, Firan, means gift in Gaelic. I roused from a reverie, and as always, the annoyance of not being able to remember rose to the surface of my mind. I'd been living here for several years, and I still could not recall where I came from or how I got here. My memories, if that's what they were always like this, hazy, ethereal, and enigmatic, merely echoes. But lately I'd come up against a wall behind which a little voice whispered, "You should know these things." A sigh escaped as I stared up and down the street. It was night, and I could already hear the raucous music coming from the bar on the corner, as well as the screaming argument in the alley between where I was standing and the neon lights announcing Peyton's place. Apparently, this name was a play on the owner's name and some show that had been on a watched screen called television back in the 20th century. When I asked Peyton about it, he just shrugged. An old dude suggested it. He's a history buff, way before my time. Peyton and I had been meeting off and on in his small apartment above the bar to do the beast with two backs. He was a good lay, and I guess I was too, considering the roaring expletives that poured forth from his mouth nearly every time we arrived at the finish line. It filled the time between work and sleep, I suppose. Better than the constant barrage of propaganda that played on the screens in our heads, provided by Iris, the immediate retinal imaging system we all carried with us. Thank everything holy it could be switched off. I was outside waiting for Peyton to close up when I heard the shouting turn into gunshots and then saw a gun-wielding man exit the dark alley at a run. I ran, too, straight for the bar. I felt the fear wafting from him and the anger under the surface. He was poised to shoot anything that moved. Strong hands grabbed my shoulders. "What's happening?" "Murder," I hissed, pointing. "That guy's crazy." Peyton laughed. "Yeah, pretty much a daily occurrence. You want to investigate?" When I shook my head, it loosened my dyed blonde hair, tangled curls falling around my shoulders. Peyton's fingers were immediately combing through it, his throaty whisper in my ear. "You know what this does to me, woman." I pulled away and pinned it up again, fastening it with a clip. "When are you going to let this shit grow out?" he asked, his fingers tracing along the dark roots. I frowned. There was something about the natural dark color that I didn't like. "Never," I whispered, taking his hand as I glanced around the empty room. He took the hint, locking the door before dragging me toward the stairwell behind the bar. It was morning before I knew it, my muscles aching from the extremely athletic night we'd had. "You stayed," he whispered, waking to gaze at me sleepily. I was too exhausted to leave. I heard the words in his mind, "You're beautiful," as he rose from the rumpled bed. "Coffee?" "Yes, and make it strong." I watched his narrow-hipped backside amble toward the Pullman's kitchen. I rose and was partially dressed when he returned with 2 steaming mugs. But what I noticed would delay my departure if I didn't get hold of myself. "No, Peyton." He grinned. "Just a goodbye kiss, that's all." "Want to ravish you, lady." I glanced at him. "You didn't get enough last night." He chuckled. What can I say? You worked your magic and the spell remains. There's no such thing as magic, I grumped, sitting on the bed to take a sip from the mug. And I have to get to work. Since the bar didn't open until 4, Peyton had all day to laze around. But my job was in construction, a day job. Tonight, then, he said, waggling his eyebrows. You're a witch, Fee, there's no doubt about it. I am not, I yelled, nearly dropping the mug. He laughed. Dropped out of nowhere with no memories? That tattoo on your forehead? What else could you be? In your eyes, I swear I can see other worlds in them. Look at yourself in the mirror. What do you mean? I asked, rising to take a look in the mirror in the bathroom. My angular face was flushed, my normally violet blue eyes turned blue-green because of the green sweater I was wearing. I was still trying to figure out what he was talking about when he came up behind me and put his arms around my waist, his head on my shoulder. Our two faces stared back at me. He was square-jawed with a 2-day growth, gray eyes, and shoulder-length brown hair mussed and falling across his forehead. The crescent moon on my forehead picked up the light, shining bright indigo as though it had been recently applied. I pulled away and hurried into the other room and grabbed my bag and the keys to my bike. See you later, crazy man. I was out the door and pounding down the stairs before he could reply. I was on my Harley and speeding down the road full of traffic when the vision came. I nearly ran off the road as the startling images flew by one after the other. Fields of wildflowers, whimsical huts made out of tree limbs, handmade chairs that looked like they were made for fairies, a woman with dark brown hair and eyes shaped like mine standing with a tattooed man with hair so black it reflected light. I let out a sob and careened across 2 lanes of traffic, coming to a screeching stop at the edge of the sidewalk. Who are you? I shouted, startling several pedestrians who skirted quickly around my bike. I heard their thoughts as they hurried by. She's crazy. Why don't they lock these people up? I sat there for several minutes before I was able to put the bike in gear and continue on my way. I was about to be late for work. I tried to calm my fast-beating heart, worried that some other vision would come, but as I drove on, all I was aware of was the layer of smog, the smell of rot, and the crowds of people wandering homeless up and down the alleys, their possessions slung in bags across their backs. I could feel the desolation wafting off them. Bright neon lights and ever-repeating lines of text caught my eye as I drove past buildings. Ads for all the wonderful things being done for us, but behind them I could feel the people who designed them, the ones who were getting rich. Their sneering faces moved in and out of my mind, their thoughts drifting in the air. Going to make a bunch on that one. What a bunch of morons. Who buys this shit? Laughter that made the hair on my arms stand up. The city was a living thing, the mirrored eyes of closed windows reflecting a foreboding darkness. I'd never been in those buildings, nor had anyone I knew. Even the idea of it gave me goosebumps. Where in hell have you been? Bill shouted when I drove in. We have a huge job to do today. I'm going to lose everything if I don't get this building done on time. I felt bad as I climbed off the bike, hurrying toward the truck packed with pallets of building supplies. I'd never been out of the city, so I had no idea where this stuff came from, obviously manufactured elsewhere. Bill and the rest of us were erecting a 20-story apartment building, and we were barely finished with framing the first 5 floors. The deadline was in 4 months. It was heavy work, and I'd grown stronger because of it. You better get your act together, Bill hissed, watching me grab the hard hat. If this happens again, you're fired. I don't want to fire her. She's my best worker, and that body, love watching her up there hanging on a cable. The hard hat fit tightly over my thick hair where I pressed it down. Not enough sleep, a terrifying vision, not to mention whatever Peyton saw in my eyes. And I hoped to hell Bill didn't come on to me. He was way too old and not my type. It was dark by the time I left work. Fall was upon us, days creeping into night way too soon. But who could really tell with the towering buildings and the smog that filled any areas where light might penetrate? The sky was a smudge of polluted darkness, my acute sense of smell picking up the rot of garbage left too long and the darker odors that lurked around the fringes. The street people were already drunk or drugged, staggering across sidewalks. Their thoughts were blurred from too much drink, but occasionally I picked up a word here and there. Feel sick. Why did I spend that fucking last credit? Where will I sleep? The streets were awash with the homeless and the half-humans who'd been created to do the dangerous work in the underground sewers and the computer systems no one knew how to deal with. Education had gone by the wayside in the rush to keep the rich happy. The mechanical humans walked stiffly. Their eyes were flat and their thoughts and feelings were muted, barely discernible. I felt sorry for them, knowing that inside those metal contraptions lurked a fragment of humanity, their brains connected to wires and metal limbs. And yet they were treated like automatons, living their lives in service to the city, their deaths only coming when they broke apart or suffered some catastrophic event. I'd seen one of them hit by a car, heard the muffled cries of pain, but when the authorities arrived and looked them over, they were taken apart and thrown into trucks like so much refuse. There were a few of these in Bill's crew, their ability to straddle inch-wide struts and use tools at the same time, putting the rest of us to shame. When I tried to speak to one, I'd seen something in the eyes buried beneath the computerized systems. It disturbed me so much I'd steered clear from then on. Who would do this to a human being? But I knew the answer to that, a person who had no regard for human life. These workers had been put together for one thing and one thing only, and fashioned from the broken, the sick, and the poor who couldn't speak up. I worked hard all day, but the tiredness in my muscles did not extend to my mind, which whirled, questioning what I'd seen in my vision and angry about the injustice of this world brought about by the ones who ran things here. My bike roared to life. There was something satisfying about this black beast I rode, the raw power and the purring engine soothing some deep place that resonated within it. An image of an enormous dragon came to mind and disappeared just as quickly. I knew that dragon. Must be a story I read as a kid, I thought, easing away from the curb and entering the line of traffic, trying not to breathe in fumes. Instead of going to the bar as I usually did, I headed home. I rented a tiny apartment along an alleyway several blocks from Peyton's place. It was barely big enough to accommodate me and the black cat I'd found starving on my stoop when I first moved in. Apparently cats this color were considered bad luck. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs and slipped the key in the lock, not surprised to hear the meow. He streaked by me and headed straight for his empty food dish. "What, no rats today?" He didn't answer, waiting until I added dried food into his dish. While he was eating, I poured a glass of wine from the bottle I'd bummed from Peyton and collapsed on the threadbare couch. My mind spun with the day's activities, but beneath it something lurked. I did not want to look at this lurking thing. Luckily, a ding in my head saved me. "Peyton calling," a voice announced. I touched my arm, activating a tiny screen that showed his face. "Are you coming over?" "Maybe, maybe not." The cat needed me. "Have you named it yet?" "Cat's fine. He comes when I call." "I need you too," he said in a husky tone. "We're getting too hot and heavy." "You're scared you're a witch." "Don't be stupid." I took a hefty swig and coughed. "I've had a lot of women, and well, let's just say I never experienced sex like what we have," he continued. I scoffed. "We have good chemistry, that's all." He let out a sigh. "Get your ass over here, all right? I need you badly." "I'll think about it," I muttered, ending the call with a wave of my finger. I glanced at the cat, who stared back at me out of the all-knowing green eyes before settling down to clean himself. Sex softened the clamoring in my head. I rationalized as I grabbed clean underwear and a pair of jeans, stuffing them onto my pack. "You're on your own tonight," I told the cat before swigging down the rest of my wine. I placed the glass in the sink, turned off the lights, and opened the door.